Good evening. The topic is going to be quite interesting as we'll get into the profile of about his younger years, as there's no really written record of his birth. Um, the mystery of Khalid Sheikh Muhammed starts in the Baluchistan province in Pakistan, which has a real um, according to other records, he was born on April 14th, 1965, or March 1st, 1964, in Kuwait. Um, what we do know his father is Sheikh Muhammad al Dawstan Baluchi, a Deobandi preacher who moved the family to Kuwait from Baluchistan in the late 1960s. His mother is Halima Muhammad, and Khalid Sheikh Muhammad is also the uncle of Ramzi Youssef. But Ramzi Youssef has a lot of synonyms and other pen names that he has, but his real name is Abdul Basit Karim. Khalid Sheikh Muhammad has a lot of other names himself. So the sound is messed up. Am I sounding better now? I hope I'm not too bad. Um, the sound is it sound all right now? Am I all right now? Let's see. Sound is still messed up. Sound good? Just want to make sure. Maybe I'll move the mic closer. That sounds a little bit better. Hopefully that'll work. Um, all right. Uh, so his family moved from Baluchistan to Kuwait in the late 1960s. This is where he would be raised. Um, After completing high school in 1983, um, Khalid Sheikh Muhammed would travel to the United States and enroll at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. While there, he completed his courses and received a Bachelor of Science in 1986. Um, he is fluent in Baluchi, Urdu, Arabic, and English. Uh, and so while he was attending university here in the States, he went through a very rough time. The students at the school basically would tease the Muslims there. Um, Americans were very ignorant toward Muslims. Sometimes while he was at evening prayers, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and other Arab students' shoes who would be left outside of the mosque would be thrown into a nearby lake. And this would really grow like a hatred for Americans in general. Um, David Klett, who's a professor of mechanical engineering at North Carolina A&T, would go on to state in an interview conducted by CNN after 9/11 that he may have given the skills to Khalid Sheikh Muhammad to carry out the 9/11 attacks. And I'll quote the CNN article, quote, "We cover the fundamentals of jet engines and propulsion and chemical reactions, combustion reaction, and those things would have been necessary for them to at least consider when they planned the World Trade Center attack with the airplanes." End quote. But it wasn't his experience at North Carolina A&T which made him uh, have this volatile nature toward the United States. It came from U.S. foreign policy towards Israel and Arabs in general. Um, but he saw the United States as a racist country, and that they had a detrimental view to Muslims as a whole. During the late 1980s, we saw the United States basically pause when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. Now, we had communist influences early in the decade, but the United States did not intervene. This would repeat during the Balkans, where you had native Soviets as well as the Yugoslavs under Slobodan Milosevic, who were slaughtering Muslims wholesale. And the United States did not intervene. In fact, the United Nations during the Balkans was completely useless. And so this caused a lot of animosity to a lot of high profile Arabs around the world. But according to US federal documents, in 1982, what interested Khalid Sheikh Muhammad was that he had heard a native Afghani by the name of Abdul Rasul Sayaf in a radio speech where he was calling for a jihad against the Soviets. And he implored the Arabs to come. One of the very few Afghans who employed Arabs in their ranks. In fact, there were only two, Abdul Rasul Sayaf and Jalaluddin Haqqani, who would later, the network, the Haqqani network, would be named after. So at age 16, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad joined the Muslim Brotherhood. And after he graduated high school, he went to Chowan University first. Then he went to North Carolina A&T. And when he graduated from North Carolina A&T, he then went back to Peshawar, Pakistan. And this is where he met a lot of high-profile connections. This is a very key area, key point in history in which he made a lot of connections. Do you think any of the Gulf states would have propped up Sayaf had Saudi not done it? Probably not. Sayaf had his own group in Pakistan, which was the Ittihad-e-Islami, which was probably the second largest Mujahideen group in Pakistan, outside of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar's Hizb-e-Islami party. So Sayaf was basically established in Pakistan. I don't know whether it's actually a good question, because I don't think any other Gulf state would probably have supported him outside of Saudi Arabia. And that's the reason why he employed Arabs in his ranks. The Afghans didn't like Arabs. So Khalid Sheikh Muhammad, basically, when he went back to travel to Peshawar, he joined up with his brother, Zahed. Zahed al-Sheikh is the older brother of Khalid Sheikh Muhammad. And I'll just talk about Zahed al-Sheikh a little bit. He volunteered to travel to Afghanistan to help resist the Soviet invasion in 1980. he is also to have reported to have shifted careers um, to the direction of non-governmental organizations or NGOs that provided aid to the refugees. Um, Khalid Sheikh Muhammed had attended the Sada training camp. Now, Sada training camp is an old training camp, one of the very first training camps that were built in Pakistan, and it was run by Sheikh Abdul Azam, who arrived in Pakistan in 1981. And through here, Khalid Sheikh Muhammed, through the influence of Abdul Rasul Sayaf, worked for the magazine Al Bunyan Al Masus, which was a paper that was produced by Sayaf's Ittihad Islami rebel group, and also the Islamic Union for the Liberation of Afghanistan. And it was founded in the early 1980s. He became Sayaf's personal secretary in charge of recruiting Afghan and Muslim jihadists to fight in the war. And KSM excelled in this area. He was a very gregarious individual, personable individual, but he wasn't very personal to even his closest confidants. And if he was, it was a very select core group of people. During his time here, Khalid Sheikh Muhammed had met Osama bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri, Abdul Hafs al-Masri, who would later become Mohammed Atef, the military commander of Al-Qaeda. And like I said, Abdul Rasul Sayaf, Abdul Azam, and even Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. So a lot of high-profile players here. His brother would also head the Pakistani branch of the Pakistan Mercy International. And according to Simon Reeve, who had authored the book, The New Jackals, Ramzi Youssef and the Future of Terrorism, he would allege that this charity-based organization had ties to the CIA and was used to funnel money to the Islamic militants during the war. Now, I spoke about this a couple of times where the CIA wouldn't directly fund certain institutions. One institution that they did fund directly was the Maktab al-Khidmat, which is the Afghan Services Bureau. However, Osama bin Laden later became the owner of this organization, and there was CIA money going to this organization. Not to say that the money went straight to him, but it was a trickle-down effect. Now, whether the CIA knew that it was going to him or whether they cared, I don't think it mattered. Bin Laden himself may not have known that the money was coming from the CIA or that it was coming from an Islamic charity or from Pakistan ISI, which most of the money was being transferred to, as well as tens of millions of dollars that were coming out of Saudi Arabia through very sympathetic and rich princes, Saudi princes. However, according to Simon Reeve, in the spring of 1993, U.S. investigators would raid Khalid Sheikh Muhammad's older brother Zahid's house. And while they were searching for Ramzi Youssef, because in 1993 we had the World Trade Center bombing, they found documents and pictures in which Zahid had a close relationship with Osama bin Laden, as well as Nawaf Sharif, who would later become the prime minister of Pakistan during the 1990s. So the Khalid Sheikh Muhammad family had some very high-powered associates and friends within the radical fundamentalists or the Mujahideen, as well as Pakistan government officials. But just a couple of times where we saw Khalid Sheikh Muhammad make contacts with these people, we also saw an influx of Arabs that were basically replacing the nationalist Afghans because they were getting slaughtered by Soviet air power. It wasn't until Operation Cyclone and through the State Department, in which they made a deal with the Afghans regarding Stinger missiles to be used to shoot down Soviet aircraft, helicopters, B 15 bombers. And this turned the tide of the war. The Arab culture within the war was basically minimal. But however, this caught the eye of Osama bin Laden, who by at this point was running two training camps, the Al Masada and Wal Jihad, one in Pakistan and one in lower Afghanistan. And so Osama bin Laden saw Khalid Sheikh Muhammad's value in recruitment and didn't forget about him. In 1992, Khalid Sheikh Muhammed received a master's degree in Islamic culture and history from Punjab University in Pakistan. And by 1993, Khalid Sheikh Muhammed would marry and move to Qatar, where he took a position as a project engineer with the Qatari Ministry of Electricity and Water, basically a no-show job. From here, he began to travel to different countries from that time onward. The 9/11 Commission report would also state that, and I'm going to read you a direct quote from the report, quote, by his own account, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad's animus toward the United States stemmed not from the experiences there as a student, but rather from his violent disagreement with U.S. foreign policy favoring Israel. However, his travels would be global during this time and afterwards, where he was suspected of being behind numerous terrorist plots, end quote. But again, on the Washington Post in 2009 would report that U.S. intelligence sources that Muhammad's time in the U.S. contributed to his radicalization. But this would turn out to be false, because he himself basically said in earlier interviews, earlier reports, and even with his interview with Yoshi Fruda just weeks after the 9/11 attacks, it was through the foreign policy of the United States. No, there's a question here. It says, was KSM strictly a desk guy for Saif, or did he fight? There is no evidence that he fought in the battlefield. That's not the case with bin Laden. We do have some reports that he was at some point fighting against the Soviets. But there is no reports that Khalid Sheikh Muhammad was ever a fighter in the field. So basically, he was a guy who was either in an office somewhere, or he was basically doing recruiting overseas. Now, he did visit the United States and other countries as well to do recruitment. During the first formative years of Al Qaeda, in June of 1991, just 2 years after the end of the Soviet war, Osama bin Laden, who was in the initial stages of forming Al Qaeda, had dispatched Khalid Sheikh Muhammad to the Philippines to help train members from the Salafist militant group, the Abu Sayyaf, and the Moral Islamic Liberation Front. Now, Osama bin Laden has a brother-in-law named Mohammed Jamal Khalifa, who basically has legitimate charities and businesses operating in the Philippines, which are basically money laundering fronts for operations for Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda in the early years. Now, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad is there, and he's training with Abu Sayyaf and the Moral Islamic Liberation Front in the use of guerrilla warfare, bomb making, and assassinations. Abu Sayyaf is basically an organization that caters to bombs, bomb threats, um, and kidnappings. This is where they made money in the first couple of years. Now, I did a video about one individual with Abu Sayyaf who went by the name Ibrahim Yaqub, but he was basically, his real name was Edwin Angeles, who was a Philippines military investigator. However, Edwin Angeles was the second in command of Abu Sayyaf, and he personally murdered people and also carried out uh, the very first kidnapping for the group. And so they led to a lot of questions whether he was an intelligence asset or a terrorist or both. But he basically reported that Khalid Sheikh Muhammed was in the Philippines at this time. And he also worked with Jamal Khalifa to establish an operational base in Malaysia. Now, this would be a key staging point. He also, at this time, is working with Abdul Basit Karim, his nephew, who went by the nom de gore Ramzi Youssef. And Ramzi Youssef is more apt at bomb making than Khalid Sheikh Muhammed, and he trains Abu Sayyaf militants in bomb making. However, bin Laden was so enamored with Khalid Sheikh Muhammed that he would give him substantial operational authority and autonomy regarding Abu Sayyaf, who's basically an asset for Al Qaeda. But Khalid Sheikh Muhammad's work with the Abu Sayyaf and the Moral Islamic Liberation Front was discovered by the Philippines investigators, and he had been on the run since 1991. The commission, the 9/11 Commission, will state, and again, I'll quote you from the report. Quote, in 1992, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad spent some time fighting alongside the Mujahideen in Bosnia and supported that effort with financial donations, which were coming from the Philippines. And during this time, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad lived in Qatar, and for the next 3 years, and in 1995, he's back in Bosnia fighting against the Soviets. The second trip to Bosnia means that Khalid Sheikh Muhammad fights there at the same time as 9/11 hijackers, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad and Wafa Hazmi, though it is not known if they met, end quote. However, that seems to be too close to home. Whether he met them or not, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Now, while they're traveling in Pakistan in 1993, they find that they're being protected by the ISI. Now, whether this is coming from Zahid al-Sheikh and his prominence with the Pakistani government, I couldn't tell you, because there are very few records regarding Khalid Sheikh Muhammad's time in Pakistan, which I find to be rather unusual, because we really don't know much about this family line regarding Khalid Sheikh Muhammad and Ramzi Youssef, who are the key to two of the biggest terrorist operations in U.S. history: the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, and of course, the September 11, 2001 attacks. And I'm not even going to mention Bojinka because it wasn't carried out. But these are huge terrorist operations, and you would think that we would know more 20 years later, more about the travels of Khalid Sheikh Muhammad and Ramzi Youssef, and really it's quite vague. So if you see me leaving out some periods of years, don't fault me for that, because I tried my best. And in fact, when I wrote an article about Khalid Sheikh Muhammad, there was a couple of years missing, and it's just like, it's really frustrating, because I have a feeling that much of his background is dealing with foreign governments and intelligence apparatuses, and whether the CIA is involved, I don't know. We could speculate, but it's really frustrating at this point. But according to Rahim Malik, who is the head of the Pakistan's Federal Investigation Agency, In July of 1993, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad and Ramzi Youssef had an unsuccessful attempt to assassinate the prime minister of Pakistan at this time, Benazir Bhutto, because she was a woman and she was against implementing the Quran and the Sunnah as the state's religion. However, Pakistan, incidentally, is 90, I think, 96% uh, Sunni uh, religion. There is a lot of Deobandi people that live here. Um, Pashtuns, very small percentage, but it is basically a Sunni country. Their vitriol comes from India and the fight for Lahore and Kashmir. Incidentally enough, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad never has any type of vitriol toward India, which is basically interesting when you think about it, because Pakistan and India, I think, are the two greatest enemies to one another than any country on earth. Uh, and that's why I always said if there was a nuclear war, it would be between those two countries. That's how much they hate each other. Nevertheless, the assassination attempt failed. And Malik would later say, and I'm going to quote you from an article he wrote, it seemed to us in the Federal Investigation Agency that the entire family, regarding Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's family, were both out to make a name for themselves. And they had clear connections with the jihadists and people in the Pakistan ISI. They were both extremely dangerous men. And to us in the Federal Investigation Agency, it always appeared that they had protection at a much higher level. When we raided Ramsey's house in Quetta, Pakistan, he had been warned, most notably by the ISI. Likewise with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's older brother Zahid al Sheikh in Peshawar. End quote. So we can safely assert that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi Youssef were protected by the ISI and maybe even some elements within the government. Now, a key point in history would come right about 1994, 95. Um, but just to go back a few months, I have to report to. I think this is important. I really do have to talk about this. Months after the 9/11 attacks, the FBI connected Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to the World Trade Center bombing because they found a financial transaction to one of the suspects. And one of the suspects was Mohammed Salame. Now, Mohammed Salame, I'm not going to talk too much about him. He gets caught because he goes back. He's the one who rents the Ryder truck, and he goes back to the Ryder truck rental to get back his deposit so he could leave the country. Yeah, I shake my head at that too. In fact, when they captured Ramzi Youssef and they told about Mohammed Salame, Ramzi Youssef basically said he's stupid. So you would think that after a terrorist attack like that, these guys would leave the country right away. And this guy went back for his deposit. Nevertheless, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed had wired $660 to Mohammed Salame. And when the FBI investigated Mohammed Salame, they found this wire transaction. And they had no idea who Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was. They had no idea. But the FBI New York Counterterrorism Office was the first domestic agency that knew who Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was. And so the New York Counterterrorism Agency is literally, I think, the best at that time, was the best counterterrorism agency in the United States. Um, and this is apparently the first time that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is come to the attention of federal domestic authorities. The transaction records show that the money was sent from a Khalid Sheikh in Doha, Qatar. Now, remember when I told you that he also had a residence in Qatar with his wife, that he had moved there. Um, Now, by late 1994, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed would travel to the Philippines and he would stay here and work with Abu Sayyaf. Um, However, when Ramzi Youssef came along, they co-opted an operation, and I did a whole live video about this, and I won't talk about this much, but I'll briefly mention it. It's Operation Bojinka. Um, the original name for this was Oplan Bojinka, which was a name that was derived from Ramzi Youssef's visit to Chechnya in the early 1990s. Um, and during their time here in the Philippines, it just seemed that they lived a very non-religious lifestyle. In fact, if you do any general research on their backgrounds, Ramzi Youssef and Khalid Sheikh Muhammed were non-religious. Even though their families were semi-religious, but they weren't very religious people, pious people. They just hid behind the religious line, just like any Wahhabi, Sunni, Wahhabi jihadist would. They're not religious. In the same fashion to most people here, everybody knows who the evangelical Christians are, right? Well, they're hardly religious. These people are nationalists, and that's what these guys are. They're basically using religion to make themselves feel as what they're doing is pious or proper or morally uh, superior to their preconceived enemies. Um, and both of them would enjoy like a very singles lifestyle. They go to karaoke bars, go-go bars. They hire and rent out go-go dancers, stay at four-star hotels. They even take scuba diving lessons. There's one story. This is one crazy story about Khalid Sheikh Muhammed, where he actually uh, he rents a helicopter. So what they do is very ingenious. By the way, they're not like doing this they're doing this for a purpose. And I'll tell you what they're doing. They're trying to get these women to trust them so they can open up bank accounts, because what they're telling them was that they can't, that they're foreigners, they want to open bank accounts here in the Philippines, and they need to use their names to open up the bank accounts. And what they'll do is they'll give them money here and there, give them bracelets and whatnot. But what they're trying to do is give them false hopes about maybe marrying them, whatnot. However, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, he rents a helicopter because there's this woman dentist. I don't know her name and stuff like that, but anyway, she's like, "Well, impress me," and so she's working in this office, and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed rents a helicopter and he flies by her window in the office to try and impress her. And boy, did that really impress her. Um, and it was a pattern. So Ramzi Youssef, he was like a playboy. These guys basically, weren't pious people, and so they would spend thousands of dollars here, um, in the hopes of getting bank accounts open for them, and so that they can, put their money into these bank accounts, because the money was coming from nefarious individuals. Who they were coming from, who knows? Intelligence apparatuses, maybe sympathetic Saudis, maybe the CIA. I couldn't tell you, but there was a lot of money coming in. Not to mention money from Bin Laden and his brother-in-law Mohammed Jamal Khalifa. Nevertheless, Operation Bojinka is in full swing, and the plot was a large-scale three-phase attack, and which involved the assassination of Pope John Paul II while he was visiting the Philippines, to blow up 11 airliners that were coming from the United States and Southeast Asia, with the goal of approximately killing 4,000 people while the planes were over the Pacific 1 minute apart. And they would have timing mechanism bombs called microbombs in each of the plane. Lastly, um, they were going to hijack a plane and purposely crash it into CIA Langley in Fairfax County, Virginia. Now, one of the associates along with the plot was an associate that was known to Ramzi Youssef while in Afghanistan, who went by the name of Abdul Hakim Murad. And he actually is a licensed pilot. He actually trained in Texas, in Oklahoma, and even in New York and New Jersey. So he was a licensed pilot, and he came up with the idea, allegedly, he came up with the idea that he was going to hijack the plane and crash it into CIA Langley. This would come later as an important point for, of course, 9/11. Now, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad rents his own room. Ramzi Youssef rents his room with Abdul Hakim Murad and whatnot. But of course, the plot didn't come to fruition because, like I said in the live video, Abdul Hakim Murad was making a chemical in the sink, and it basically created this big, thick, black acrid smoke. And it went out the doors and windows, and everybody thought the place was on fire. They ran out because everybody's looking. And however, Abdul Hakim Murad left his laptop there. Ramzi Youssef tells him to go back and get it. And like a dummy, he went back and he gets caught. Um, and one of the documents found on Ramzi Youssef's laptop, which was decoded by the FBI, was that the Bojinka plot had a broad objective. And the objective came from Khalid Sheikh Muhammad. And it was basically, I'll quote you what the directive was. And this is coming from FBI transcripts that I'm going to read to you. And they're public, they're on archive.org. Quote, all people who support the U.S. government are our targets in our future plans. And that is because all those people are responsible for the government's actions and they support the U.S. foreign policy and are satisfied with it. We will hit all U.S. nuclear targets. If the U.S. government keeps supporting Israel, then we will continue to carry out operations inside and outside the United States to include blank. Numerous targets were blank. End quote. Now, does that sound like a man who hates you for dressing too modern, or that women voted, or that you liked alcohol? No, that's what the State Department would want you to believe. They hate you for your freedoms. This is basically them telling you that your foreign policy is hurting the Arab world and that Israelis' policies are hurting the Palestinians. Now, this is something that was brought up with older Arab organizations like Abu Nidal, the ANO group, Fatah, Hezbollah, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Algerian Islamic group. I mean, go on. And it's basically all these terrorist groups have their objectives, and their objectives are U.S. foreign policy or Israeli foreign policy. Now, if the American people were to concentrate on foreign policy, we would say, aha, maybe we can make the necessary corrections because it seems that we have a biased foreign policy to the Gulf and Israel. By the way, fast forward to the year 2021, guess what? We still have those same policies. Okay, not to get too lost in that. According to the FBI, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad is actually much more than, say, Ramzi Youssef. He was considered the mastermind of the Bojinka Plot. And under interrogation, Abdul Hakim Murad basically confessed the importance of Khalid Sheikh Muhammad, but he doesn't know his name because Khalid Sheikh Muhammad used a nom de guerre, and he had a number of different names. Now, I'm going to name you just a couple, but he went by 53 different synonyms. And I'll name you just a couple. Ashraf Rafat Nabi Hanin, Khalid Abdul Waldud, Salim Ali, Abdul Majid, Abdullah Al Fasaki Al Ganor, and Fahad bin Abdallah bin Khalid. I'm pretty sure a lot of people haven't heard those names before. But Murad basically told the lead investigator of the Philippines, Rodolfo Mendoza, that there was another extension of the plot and that this would later become part of or the genesis of the September 11th attacks. And so Murad told them in 1996 that they had sleeper cells inside the United States that were going to hijack commercial airliners at some point after the Bojinka operation died down. So this would be a second wave. And that Murad would be part of this operation. And he named the 10 buildings that would be targeted for the attack. And those 10 buildings were CIA headquarters, the Pentagon, an unidentified nuclear power plant, the Transamerica Tower in San Francisco, the Sears Tower in Chicago, the World Trade Center, the John Hancock Tower in Boston, U.S. Congress, the Capitol, and the White House. These statements aren't coming from torture. So, what you have is basically an operation that was constructed by Khalid Sheikh Muhammed and Ramzi Youssef, and later co opted by Khalid Sheikh Muhammed to target U.S. targets. And this is 6 years prior to the 6 years prior to the attacks of September 11, 2001. Because Rodolfo Mendoza, after his interrogation of Murad, basically gave a copy of the interrogation report regarding the second wave of attacks to the FBI. At that point, the FBI should have informed Immigration and Naturalization Services and the Federal Aviation Association in regards to stricter security measures. Wow, we have noted terrorists who were planning an international terrorist operation that involved the attack of airliners. Not just the attack of airliners, but also hijacking. This is 6 years prior. But according to Mendoza, the FBI did nothing with it. Now, I have interviewed a number of individuals from the FBI, like Ken Williams, Mark Rossini, Colleen Rowley, who have basically stated that the warnings were there years prior, and they ignored them. Now, this leads to many conspiracies, and I don't blame for people suggesting some of these, like, oh, they wanted this to happen, oh, they facilitated this. You know, these are very harsh questions, but and very harsh allegations. But I don't blame them. But we have to be careful when we make these insinuations. I'll read some questions in the room before I continue. The messaging about the justification. You ever consider interviewing Peter Lance? I'm actually talking with him in email. I might be interviewing Peter Lance in the future. So I'm hoping that will be the case. But I don't want to digress. So February 7th, 1990. By the way, also, this is, let me just go this. February 7th, 1995, Ramzi Youssef is captured in Pakistan with the help of the U.S. Diplomatic Security Services and the Pakistan ISI. They capture him in a hotel room. And it was basically an informant that basically helped them capture him. Ironically, this would be the same thing that would happen to Khalid Sheikh Muhammed later. Now, the FBI basically arranges for a photograph to be taken of Youssef, and they took a picture of him and stuff like that. He's indicted in 1996. He's convicted for the Bojinka Plot in 1993 World Trade Center bombing. And so is Khalid Sheikh Muhammed in absentia because he's not caught. Khalid Sheikh Muhammed travels to the Sudan and stays with bin Laden for a little bit here and then travels to Qatar. Now, Qatar, the government, would later confirm that Khalid Sheikh Muhammed is there and he's making explosives and he's detained under house arrest. But they delay handing him over because, like I said before, he had a no-show job with the Qatari Ministry of Water and Electric, whatever position that was. And after several months, there was a high level meeting taking place in Washington, D.C. to consider maybe having a commando raid to seize him. Now, this was during the Clinton administration. And I just have to mention this: the Clinton administration is the first administration to employ the executive order authorizing renditions from a foreign country by force. And a lot of people get that mixed up and say, well, wasn't that under the Bush administration? That actually started under the Clinton administration. Had the FBI posted financial rewards for Khalid Sheikh Muhammed and Yusuf? I imagine rewards were influential by generating informants. If so, Pure Palm, it's a good question. Yes, they did for both. Yusuf, I believe, was $5 million. And what they did was somebody from the Counterterrorism Center in Virginia, and I forgot his name, and I did mention this a long time ago, a couple of years ago, and he basically made match because, and this is really ingenious when you think about it. They made these matchbooks, right? And they had a picture of Yusuf and a reward at the bottom because they found out that Pakistanis smoked a lot and that it was an absurd number of Pakistanis that smoked. So the guy thought of an idea. He said, instead of putting flyers and posters, why don't we make like 10 million matchbooks and put Ramzi Yusuf's face on it and the reward at the bottom? And they dumped all these matchbooks off like planes, and they would have associates go to Pakistan and just put them everywhere. Millions of these matchbooks. In fact, I actually went on eBay and bought 3 of them, and I have some of them in a tub, which is funny. So, yeah, that's what they did. And the informant who helped the U.S. diplomatic services and to arrest Yusuf, he collected the money. Same thing for Khalid Sheikh Muhammed later, but they didn't use matchbooks. In fact, the informant um, basically found out that his reward was $25 million. And that's how he got caught. But not to digress there. While Khalid Sheikh Muhammad was in Qatar, the CIA basically denounced the option of doing commando raids and renditioning Khalid Sheikh Muhammad because, according to the CIA, they weren't in the rendition business, which is really ironic because later on they would be the primary agency to rendition after just 6 years later, right? Amazing. So there was this argument in Washington, D.C. about who's going to go in and capture Khalid Sheikh Muhammad. So the FBI and the CIA are arguing over who gets the credit of trying to capture Khalid Sheikh Muhammad. Meanwhile, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad escapes. And I think it was basically through the Qatari government that warned him. Because Washington, D.C. saw that the raid was too risky, and they sent a letter. This is how he escaped, really. They sent a letter to the Qatar government. And the letter said, and I'm going to read you the quote of the letter. It said, if we had gone in and nabbed this guy or cut his head off, the Qatari government would not have complained a bit. Everyone around the table at Washington, D.C., for their own reasons, refused to go after someone who fundamentally threatened American interests, end quote. Just picture him arguing. Like the head director of CIA, the FBI, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This is the National Security Council, right? They have meetings every month where they talk about counterterrorism and threats to the country. And so just picture this argument happening there. So he leaves, right? However, this is really important. This is something that's I mentioned to an associate of mine, DJ Thermal Detonator. I showed him an article from the New York Times. I'm not making this up. While he fled Qatar, he basically visits other countries. and two countries he visits, and it's not known the dates of when he traveled there, but he went to Israel and the United States. Now, the article that I brought up to DJ Thermal Detonator, he had no idea. In fact, a lot of people didn't know, I have no idea. And it was through luck that when I did the article for Khalid Sheikh Muhammed, um, I was doing some really deep seated research on documents from archive.org and on scrib.org, and also from old newspaper articles. And I got to thank DJ Thermal Detonator. He's the best at it. So I was looking through these old articles. I found that by accident. And that was coming from the reports. And that's not coming from, some made up article. That's coming from the mouth of Abdul Hakim Murad, who basically told the Philippines investigators that while he was visiting Qatar and while he was constricting the Operation Bojinka Plot, he would travel to the United States and Israel. What he traveled there for and under what pretenses, I don't know. But I find that to be really interesting. Wouldn't you? Here's a guy who basically hates the West, who basically has threatened the West numerous times in terrorist operations, and he's traveling to these countries. I mean, that's really something else. Stunning, to be quite honest with you. So while the CIA basically creates Alex Station in 1996, and then you had Able Danger in 96, in which I spoke about twice in other live videos. If you want to look at those, please be my guest. I went in depth with each one. But nobody, absent outside of a few people in New York, nobody knew at this point who Khalid Sheikh Muhammed was. They only knew him by his nom de guerres, his synonyms. But there was an agent named Frank Pellegrino. He knew who Khalid Sheikh Muhammed was. And he was the FBI agent who was chasing Khalid Sheikh Muhammed in Qatar and got into an argument with the CIA about capturing him. Now, the CIA basically ignores a warning from a recently retired CIA agent named Robert Baer. Now, you probably have heard that name before. He's written a couple of books, and he left the CIA in late 1997, and he began private consulting in the Middle East because he was a Middle East case officer for years. Robert Baer had met with Hamad bin Jassim Al Thani, who is the Qatari's Minister of Economy and its chief of police. And Al Thani told Baer that Khalid Sheikh Muhammed is bin Laden's chief of terrorist operations. Now, I got to also mention this. Khalid Sheikh Muhammed doesn't join Al Qaeda to this point because bin Laden had asked Khalid Sheikh Muhammed to swear bayat, which is loyalty, to bin Laden numerous times, and he didn't want to because he didn't like answering to another authority, Khalid Sheikh Muhammed. He was very jealous of this. He liked to be on his own. He liked to do things on his own, but he knew that his options were limited and that he was a wanted man by federal authorities. And the reason why Khalid Sheikh Muhammed escaped in Qatar was because the Qatari royals helped him escape. That's according to Robert Baer. In early 98, Robert Baer passed this to the CIA. All this information. He sends this incredibly important information to the Counterterrorism Center, who's now under the authority of Cofer Black. However, he gets a letter back and says that the CIA showed no interest whatsoever about Khalid Sheikh Muhammed. Interesting. Later on that year, in 1998, Khalid Sheikh Muhammed, now, of course, I'm going to tell you right now, take this with a grain of salt, okay? Because this is coming from Khalid Sheikh Muhammed and Ramzi bin al-Shib, and they were tortured by the CIA. Whether they told the truth or not, we can't tell, because I think that's exactly the reason why the CIA tortured them, was so that even if they told the truth under torture, you couldn't tell what was true and what was not, because they admitted to so many things. And that's exactly how they paralyze you. Because if you make a decision, it's your decision comes from knowledge. Remember what I told you in the last discussion, how important it is between belief and knowledge. You want to know something, not believe something, because belief paralyzes you. So, what I'm about to tell you right now, take with a grain of salt. Okay? In 1998, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad visits bin Laden in Tora Bora, Afghanistan. And the meeting was set up by Mohammed Atef, who went by the name Abdul Hafs al Masri, but his new name was Mohammed Atef. Now, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad would relate to bin Laden about a plan to target American cities without the use of bombs, because now, with the Bojinka Plot up, they would say that they were going to be looking out for bombs on these planes, but they wouldn't know about hijacking these planes. They would have known that had the FBI shared the information about the Bojinka Plot of the second wave of attacks, which was regarding hijacking airlines, with the FAA or with the Immigration Naturalization Services about heightening security. Khalid Sheikh Muhammad proposed to bin Laden that the plane itself would be the weapon. By hijacking it and crashing it using Arab associates to look like Americans and to crash it into U.S. targets. Now, of course, this was part of the Bojinka Plot plan, which was basically outlined by Khalid Sheikh Muhammad. Khalid Sheikh Muhammad told bin Laden that they were going to hijack 10 planes, just like Operation Bojinka outlined. And now hear this. This is the crazy part. And you probably don't know this, but I'm going to tell you this. That Khalid Sheikh Muhammad was going to take part in the hijacking of the 10th plane, kill all the men on it, leave the women and children alive. He would land the plane in a U.S. city, and he would hold a media gathering and tell the media about why he did what he did in regards to 9 planes crashing into U.S. targets with the 10th plane landing. And this was such a narcissist move, because he is a narcissist. There's good books out there. I interviewed Terry McDermott. He wrote a great book called The Hunt for KSM, which is a great biography into the mind of this man. And he's basically just a narcissist off the chart. Now, that's something else, if we're to believe it. Okay. Now, bin Laden said, this is a lot to take in. Let me talk it over and let's see. And then he asked Khalid Sheikh Muhammad to swear bayat, loyalty. Khalid Sheikh Muhammad said no. Khalid Sheikh Muhammad later gets back in the autumn of 1998, requires a second meeting with bin Laden. Mohammed Atef coordinates the meeting. And in the second meeting, bin Laden had asked Khalid Sheikh Muhammad to join Al Qaeda, and he does. And the reason why Khalid Sheikh Muhammad does is because now he needs money. Because there's no money coming in. Yusuf is gone. The federal authorities are chasing him. His options are limited right now. So he swears bayat, loyalty to bin Laden. But bin Laden tells him, you're in charge of this operation, but it involves 4 planes. And that bin Laden would select the pilots, and Khalid Sheikh Muhammad would be in charge of the muscle hijackers. And to keep a close eye on Khalid Sheikh Muhammad, he offers to have Khalid Sheikh Muhammad's family move from Qatar to Kandahar so that he could keep close wraps on Khalid Sheikh Muhammad. And he does. And he gives Khalid Sheikh Muhammed full autonomy. He's in charge of the plot. At this time, the FBI announces a $2 million reward for KSM for his uh, participation in the Bojinka Plot, as well as being involved in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing with the wire transfer to Mohammed Salame. Now, there are old wanted posters of him, and I don't have like a screen share. I wish I could do that here. I don't know how to do it, so I don't have it. But there's an old picture of Khalid Sheikh Muhammad. He has a full beard, and he looks nothing what he looks like now and stuff like that. But um, that's interesting to note that there was still wanted posters of Khalid Sheikh Muhammad, one without a beard and one with a beard. Um, and so that was the initial interesting to Khalid Sheikh Muhammad. However, what's even more incredible, and I mean, this is really off the charts, with with the I can't basically I'm trying to give like a rational excuse for this, but it would sound really banal. So I'm just going to say it. In the winter of '98, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad visited the United States. Yes. He has a current valid U.S. visa. How on earth does this guy have a U.S. visa when the FBI basically has a $2 million reward for him and he comes into the country? Remember what I told you about the New York Times article that he enters the United States and he enters Israel? How is this possible? Is he protected? I mean, that's really a rational question, right? That's not like I'm not entertaining fringe questions here. And that's a reasonable question. How is that possible? While he's here, he actually takes flying lessons. Whether he was going to, because he wanted to be a part of the 10th plane or whatever. But I don't know whether he was going to entertain 10 planes or he was really going to do the 4. But I think it was more planes anyway. But that would contradict what bin Laden wanted, wouldn't it? 4 planes. But we do know that there were additional potential hijackings on 9/11. But the State Department won't tell you that. The FBI won't tell you that. Why? Khalid Sheikh Muhammad is here in the United States. He's here on a U.S. visa. He's training at flight schools. Why? He's not going to be a part of the 4-plane operation. Bin Laden already said that. It makes you think. It really, these are the questions you should be asking. Anyway, in 1999, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad meets with Ramzi bin al-Shibh, and he's introduced to Muhammad Atta, Marwan al-Shehi, and Ziad Jarrah. Now, he would take these 3 guys from Hamburg. These are the Hamburg cell. I might do a live discussion about these guys in the future. And he selects them to be pilots for the plane's operation. And they all swear bayat loyalty to bin Laden. Take with a grain of salt. They receive extra training at the Mes Anak camp. And I'm going to put that in the room. Mes Anak. I want to spell it correctly. Anak. That's the name of the camp that they trained at. I don't know what they trained at. It's in Afghanistan. Now, Ramzi bin al-Shibh was selected to be a pilot. It was going to be him, Muhammad Atta, Marwan al-Sheikh, and Ziad Jarrah. But Ramzi bin al-Shibh couldn't get a U.S. visa. He couldn't get a German visa either. He was let to be a coordinator, a facilitator. And they later selected Hani Hanjour because he was actually in the United States as early as 1992 when he went to the University of Arizona to study electrical engineering. He was also a licensed pilot, received his certificate's pilot's instrument rating in 1999. Later on, the group included Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Midar. Now, these guys were supposed to be the pilots for Flight 77, but because they spoke little to no English, they had to be the muscle. One of the Al Qaeda commanders, his name is Khalid bin Atash, and he would be Walid bin Atash, I'm sorry. He would go by the nickname Khalad. That's what the CIA would know him as, Khalad. He would be involved with the USS cold bombing and to some extent, financially at least, the 9/11 attacks. Um, while they're at this training camp, this is according to statements made by detainees that were captured and sent to Guantanamo. The courses at that camp, which I described to you, focused on physical fitness, firearms, close quarter combat, shooting from a motorcycle, and night operations, which seemed every bit as like a guerrilla warfare type of setting, not a setting about hijacking airliners. Remember what I told you a while back about Al Masada training camp, where they were training other Arabs and Afghans in small guerrilla arms fire? Well, that would be this. It would be not useful for a hijacking planes operation. Makes you think, makes you wonder what they were really training for. Um, they were also training to say basic English words at the training camp and to read plain timetables, phone books. They would learn to use the internet, um, make travel reservations, rent apartments, and try to get them as much as westernized as possible to make them assimilate with American culture. Now, in addition to all this, they also train it with simulated games, flight simulated games. They would watch hijacking themed films um, and investigate the visa applications for Southeast Asian countries. Um, and Khalid Sheikh Muhammed also tells them what to watch for when casing a flight. So this would come in handy because Muhammad Atta was basically spotted months prior to the attacks at an Atlanta um, commercial airline in Atlanta, and he was casing the joint. And actually, if I got this right, he was dressed as a pilot. There are some unusual stories about like Muhammad Atta and Marwan al Shehi casing the joints at airlines, looking at security. And this is documented by the FBI in the FBI commission, the 9/11 commission, and the Pent Bomb investigation, where they would interview employees of security companies in the East Coast and the Mid Atlantic, where they basically said, "Yeah, we saw these guys. You know, the pictures of Muhammad Atta and Marwan al Shade, they were casing security checkpoints." So there's enough evidence there to show that they were trying to do just that. Um, in January of 2000, there's a high level summit meeting called the Kuala Lumpur Malaysia Al Qaeda Summit Meeting, and Khalid Sheikh Muhammad is there. And there's a whole number of really high profile terrorists here. And I'll name some of them. Ridwan Isamuddin, who goes by the Nam Degur Hambali, who's the co-leader of Jemaah Islamiyah in Indonesia. Yazid Sufat, who's an Indonesian businessman who owns the condominium where the summit is held. Khalid Sheikh Muhammad, Khalid, Khalid al-Midar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, Salim al-Hazmi, the brother, Ramzi bin al-Shib, Tawfiq bin Atash, that's Khalad, Abdul al-Rahim al-Nasri, and Fahad al-Kuso, who is suspected to be involved with the USS cold bombing. Now, the meeting is held from January 5th, 2000. And by the way, the meeting is known by the CIA. So the CIA and the Malaysian authorities are there. So Malaysian authorities take pictures. They allegedly take video too of the people coming in and out of the condominium by name. And these pictures are sent to Alex Station. And the NSA is the lead agency because they heard the phone call at the Yemen hub. Remember, I did a live discussion on this, where they told the CIA about the meeting and to, take pictures and share them with us. Yeah, the CIA got the pictures from the Malaysian authorities. It went to Alex Station, but they never shared it with anybody, including the NSA, who told them about the operation of the meeting. Yeah. The CIA learned that there was 11 young guys there, and young guys is meaning for operatives, Al Qaeda operatives. And they took photographs of Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, and Khalid. That's Tawfiq bin Attash. And even though the FBI is aware of this meeting as well, they don't have pictures. So they're left with like a chart on the board with names and an old picture if they have one, or just a name. According to James Bamford, who I'm pretty sure a lot of people in this room have heard of, in the book Pretext for War, and I'm going to quote you from the book. Even Bamford notices this. Quote, pull it up. Quote, the CIA purposely hid al-Mihdhar and al-Hazmi from the FBI, purposely refused to tell the Bureau. The thing was, they didn't want John O'Neill and the FBI running over their case, and that's why September 11th happened. They have blood on their hands, end quote. And if you're not familiar with James Bamford, he is a great author. Some of the best books I've ever read have come from him. And one of the best books I've read is The Shadow Factory. And I'm actually uploading that chapter by chapter on my blog, on my WordPress blog, so you could read it for free. It's up. I even upload it on Twitter. So, but instead of going through Twitter to look for pages, go on my blog. And I'll even share that with you here. Just give me a minute, so that you could look it up. Just search for the Shadow Factory, and it will come. I'll share it right here and with you in the room. Here's the link. So, oh shoot, yeah. So that's the link, and it's a great book. It talks about the NSA, the CIA, Alex, all that stuff. Great book, really great book. Finally, in the year 2000, Khalid Sheikh Muhammed is put on a domestic no-fly list. What took so long? They knew about this guy in 1996, and 4 years later, maybe we should put this guy on a no-fly list. When he was already inside the United States before, a year prior, 1999, training at flight schools with a U.S. visa. Amazing. But also on the no-fly list is like 6 other Al Qaeda operatives. And they were all said to be associates of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, including Ramzi Youssef. Now, let me ask you, ladies and gentlemen in the room, did it make any sense to put people who are serving 240 years in prison on a no-fly list? I think it would be simple deduction to think that these guys weren't going to fly a plane anytime soon unless they outlived their 240-year sentences. I don't know what to tell you. Pretty dumb. But the name of the list, by the way, is called TIPOFF. TIPOFF. That's the name of the domestic no-fly listing. So much happens here in the year 2000. It just makes you wonder, like, how is it possible? Like, these guys just slip in? Because, of course, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, they're tracked by the CIA from the Malaysia summit meeting and then allegedly lost by the CIA when they entered the United States. We lost track of them. just like they lost track of Khalid Sheikh Muhammed in Qatar. So they're here in the United States, and the CIA knows it. They know they're inside the United States. They don't tell anybody. I wonder if that was the case with Khalid Sheikh Muhammed when he was here in 1999. Did they know? It's a reasonable question. But while Khalid Al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi are inside the States, they have a hard time learning the English language. They're supposed to go to ESL schools, English Second Language schools, and they don't. They're lazy. So they don't go. And Khalid Sheikh Muhammed is not happy about this. But while they were talking on the phone, because the NSA is listening, because they're listening to Nawaf al-Hazmi's cell phone, they heard him talk to a person on the other line. It would later turn out to be Khalid Sheikh Muhammed. And they monitored 6 phone calls of Nawaf al-Hazmi. By the way, the cell phone he has was monitored even from Malaysia, and they still didn't tell anybody about this. So one time in a phone call, Nawaf al-Hazmi tells Khalid Sheikh Muhammed that while they were traveling out of Bangkok from the meeting, that he thought they were being followed by intelligence agents. I'm pretty sure they were, because the CIA and the NSA knew about these two guys in 1999. And who knows what the NSA heard on those phone calls for 6 years at the Yemen hub? Who knows? Right? So they must have the jump on these guys. They know where they're going. They know what they're going to do. That's a reasonable deduction. That's a rational deduction. Because with information, you can control the outcomes of an operation before they even happen. This is the reason why the intelligence agencies are the most powerful agencies on the earth. However, in 2000 as well, Khalid Al-Mihdhar, his wife had a baby. He left the United States to go visit. And Khalid Sheikh Muhammed was really mad, and he was going to pull him out of the operation. He went to bin Laden and told him about this, and bin Laden said, no, let him go visit. Fine. Khalid Al-Mihdhar is a known Al-Qaeda operative. He comes back inside the United States. No hesitation. In fact, while he was in Yemen, he actually applies for a second U.S. visa. And he gets it. It's amazing. You can't make this stuff up. It's literally incredible. So Khalid Sheikh Muhammed basically is now waiting for the operation to take place. And of course, September 11th happens. Bin Laden is actually in Afghanistan. And days later, I think a couple of weeks later, like 2 weeks later. No, I'm sorry. Let me back up. Khalid Sheikh Muhammed basically held an interview with Yoshri Fuda. Now, this is important. Yoshri Fuda wrote a book, The Confessions of a Mastermind. And he's actually an Al Jazeera reporter out of Britain. He receives a fax, and the fax is basically telling him that, are you interested in having an interview with KSM? At this point, a lot of people don't know about Khalid Sheikh Muhammed, even after 9/11. Everybody is blaming bin Laden. And yet, they don't realize that he didn't construct the operation. They just said it was him because they don't know who Khalid Sheikh Muhammed was. Yes, Suhaib, you would be right. It's in 2002. But Khalid Sheikh Muhammed is such a vain individual. He gets in contact with Yoshri Fuda, and he tells him to come to Pakistan. And through a number of different intermediaries, he stays at a hotel, and he's being watched there, right? So he's being watched there for 3 days. He stays there for, I think, 3 or 2 days. And he gets a call on the phone to come downstairs. There's a cab waiting for him. And so he goes in his cab. And as he's being driven, he's driven to a house. Um, I forgot the name of the city. I want to say Islamabad? No. Jalalabad, maybe. Maybe Jalalabad. Where they host Yoshri Fuda in the house. And he tells them, Rawalpindi, you're the man. Suaheb Muib, you're the man. Rawalpindi, that's right. And so he basically hosts Yoshri Fuda in his house. With him is Ramzi bin al-Sheikh. Okay? So they're basically talking with him, and they're telling him everything, the whole plot. Now, whether you want to say that Yoshri Fuda is making this up, I don't think so. I think he was telling the truth. He's actually a really reputable journalist. There is a there's a Arabic documentary which I'm going to share in the room because it's very hard to look up because I don't speak Arabic. However, it's a two-part documentary. I want to say it's two parts. Yes, it is. It's two parts. Whereas part one, I'm going to share with you, it's in English subtitles. Okay. And it basically details the story of his meeting with Khalid Sheikh Muhammed and Ramzi bin al-Sheikh and what he unearthed, what they gave him. And I'm going to share it in the live stream with you. And this is probably the most remarkable 9/11 investigative report I've ever seen. It leaves a lot out because it was made in 2002. Okay. Not much is known in 2002, but what he unearths here is amazing. It's really amazing. So he tells him about the whole plot. He stays there for 2 or 3 days. I don't know how long. It was like 2 days. And then he goes back, Yoshri Fuda, and he tells them that, hey, listen, I got a back groundbreaking story. These guys were behind 9/11. And so one of the people, I think it's the director of the British arm of Al Jazeera, he's actually friends with somebody from Qatar, and they tell the CIA. And that's how the CIA found out that these two guys were in Pakistan. Now, there's a couple of different stories here. By the way, Fuda had a video of this interview, and the video was held by Khalid Sheikh Muhammed and Ramzi bin al-Sheikh. To what they wanted to do was blot out their faces and then give it back to Fuda. However, this doesn't last, and I'll tell you why. Shortly after the interview, the Pakistani ISI and the FBI find out through a cell phone transmitter by the NSA that Ramzi bin al-Sheikh was somewhere in Karachi. And there was this huge firefight. And he's captured. Weeks later, on March 1st, 2003, the Pakistan, along with the CIA, capture Khalid Sheikh Muhammed. There's a number of different stories about how he was captured. Whether he was in a safe house and there was an informant with him, a guy who basically found out now it's not $2 million. His reward is $25 million. And he basically went into a CIA base station and he says that he knows who Khalid Sheikh Muhammed was. Now, of course, CIA was very wary of this, saying, yeah, sure, stuff like that. But he told him about certain things. And he said, all right, here's a number. And this guy basically met Khalid Sheikh Muhammed in this house. And he texted on his phone the letter I, M, W, KSM. I'm with KSM. And he told him about the safe house too, ahead of time, about he was staying here. And that's allegedly how they captured him. Now, there was an India Times report saying that Khalid Sheikh Muhammad was killed in a firefight, but that later turned out to be false. And his family basically said, that was untrue anyway. Um, but there's so many conflicting stories about how he was captured, so I really can't pin it down. But he was captured. Whether it was February 29th or March 1st, even the dates, we don't know. But he's captured. Um, I'm going to try and read you. I think it's really important to do this because I can end it here. But this is important to add. Really important because this will basically throw a monkey wrench into what we believe and what we know. So Khalid Sheikh Muhammad actually is sent to a CIA black site. And I'm going to read you the report made by the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence in regards to the CIA detention and interrogation program. And if anybody's not familiar with this, the SEER program, okay, is a CIA program sent by the CIA, which is survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. And it was a program made by two individuals, CIA contractors, Bruce Jessen and James Mitchell. The CIA wanted to conduct interrogations because they found out that the FBI were the first people to interrogate Al Qaeda. The first Al Qaeda operative that was captured was Abu Zubaydah, and the FBI was interrogating him. In fact, the one FBI agent that was interrogating him was Ali Soufan, and he brought him some pictures, and he called him by his nickname Hani, which is what his mother called him, and he opened up to him. And Ali Soufan showed him a bunch of pictures, and he was like, this and that, and he showed him one picture. There was one picture in a briefcase, according to Ali Soufan, and it was a picture of Khalid Sheikh Muhammad, but he didn't know his name. He didn't know his name. And he gave him that picture by accident because he was with another agent. I forgot his name. And he says, hey, give me the other picture in the briefcase. And he gave him a picture of Khalid Sheikh Muhammad. And then Abu Zubaydah basically looks at the picture and goes, Mukhtar. How do you know Mukhtar was behind 9/11 or September 11th? And Ali Soufan basically, he's trying to play it off. He says, remember, we know everything. But this is the first time that an Al Qaeda operative basically is saying, without being tortured, by the way, that Khalid Sheikh Muhammad was the mastermind behind 9/11. He goes in a hallway, according to Ali Soufan, and this is according to his book, The Black Banners. He goes and he speaks with the other agent, and he says, holy shoot, Frank was right. In other words, Frank Pellegrino from New York, who was chasing Khalid Sheikh Muhammad for years. And they tell the New York office, we got to get in touch with him. We got to capture this guy, not knowing that he's captured by the CIA. And not only is he captured, the CIA finds out that Ali Soufan is interviewing Abu Zubaydah. They also found out that they capture another guy named Abu Rabid al-Nashri, who I told you was in the Kuala Lumpur meeting. He's actually captured, and the FBI is interviewing him. CIA Director George Tenet goes and complains to George Bush that the CIA should be pulled off all future interrogations of Al Qaeda. Bush agrees. Weeks later, Bush makes the mandate authorized by Donald Rumsfeld about the CIA using enhanced interrogation techniques, EIT, using the SEER program headed by Bruce Jessen and James Mitchell, who are in charge of the SEER program. And they use those methods to coerce information out of these people. Now, remember, decades and decades ago, they did this to people in the MK Ultra program. And I'm pretty sure you've heard about this. It's a biological, neurological program that was kept under tight wraps. And when the Frank Church committee hearings happened, they destroyed most of the documents relating to the MK Ultra program. However, I'm going to read you from the documents from the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence regarding Khalid Sheikh Muhammed and his arrival at CIA black sites. And this is not, a lot of these are redacted, so I'm going to do the best I can. And the headliner of this document is called "The CIA Transfers Khalid Sheikh Muhammed to Detention Site Blue," which is a CIA black site. And they anticipate use of the waterboard prior to his arrival. So you're probably not aware of this. And this was uncovered by the Senate Select Committee. They were going to torture him before he even got there. They made up their mind. It wasn't like that he was there, because the CIA basically lied. And they said that he was withholding information and that we have to use these methods. That's not true. Because according to their own documents, they were going to torture him regardless. And I'll read you the rest. Blank. Within hours of Khalid Sheikh Muhammad's capture, KSM, Alex Station successfully argued that CIA contractors Swigert and Dunbar, code for Bruce Jessen and James Mitchell, should take over the interrogation of Khalid Sheikh Muhammad upon KSM's arrival at Detention Site Blue. On March 3rd, 2003, CIA headquarters approved an interrogation plan indicating that Khalid Sheikh Muhammad will be subjected to immediate interrogation techniques, and that the interrogation techniques will increase in intensity from standard to enhanced interrogation commensurate with KSM's level of resistance until he indicates initial cooperation. On March blank 2003, the day of KSM's arrival at Detention Site Blue, the on-site medical officer described the use of the waterboard on KSM as inevitable. And according to this medical officer, he says, the team here apparently looks to use the waterboard in two different contexts. One is as a tool of regression and control, in which it is used to upfront and aggressively. The second is to vet information on an as needed basis. Given the various pressures from home versus what is happening on the ground, I think the team's expectation is that KSM will be getting treatment somewhere in between. I don't think they believe that it will be possible to entirely avoid the waterboard given the high and immediate threat to U.S. and allied interests. It is an interesting dynamic because they are well aware of the toll it would take on the team versus the detainee. Oh, the poor detainee. I mean, the poor team, right? They're not getting tortured. The requirements coming from home are really unbelievable in terms of breadth and detail. And there's a little bit more. Now, that's the end of the medical officer's, uh, uh, his comment. Now, this is coming from the cable. And this is absurd. Meanwhile, Office of Management Systems completed draft guidelines on the use of the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques, specifically addressing waterboard. These guidelines were sent to the medical personnel detention site. Efforts would emerge after 3 to 5 days that there would be an upper limit on the total number of waterboard exposures, approximately 20 times a week. 20 times a week. CIA records indicate that as of the day of KSM's arrival at Detention Site Blue, the interrogation team had not reviewed the draft. I'll stop it there. Khalid Sheikh Muhammad was waterboarded 173 times in 3 weeks. 173 times in 3 weeks. Ramzi bin al-Shibh was, I think, waterboarded 82 times. Now, I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that you would be saying everything, including selling out your own mother after the 10th time you're waterboarded. Because if you're not familiar with waterboarding, it simulates drowning. And it's one of the worst torture methods out there. But Khalid Sheikh Muhammed basically gives them the holy grail of operations. Whether they're fictitious or not, couldn't tell you. But I could tell you this. He confessed to 38 different crimes. 38 different crimes, which would be literally impossible given the limited timetable window he had between 1998, when he swore loyalty to bin Laden, and 2001. And he basically submitted the following: that he was responsible for the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. He was responsible for the 9/11 operation from A to Z. He decapitated Daniel Pearl. He's responsible for the shoe bombing operation. Remember Richard Reed, shoe bomber? He's responsible for that. I was responsible for the Fika Island operation in Kuwait that killed 2 American soldiers. I was responsible for the bombing of a nightclub in Bali, Indonesia, which is called the Bali bombings of 2002, the second largest terrorist operation in history. I did a video on that, by the way. I was responsible for planning, training, surveying, and financing the second wave of attacks on 9/11. And that's what me and DJ Thermal Detonator were trying to share with the public, that there was a second wave of attacks. And that came from Zacharias Moussaoui. And he wasn't tortured, by the way. He even says it. The attack on the Library Tower in California, the Sears Tower, a future attack on the Empire State Building. I was responsible for planning to destroy the Sears Tower by burning a few oil tanker trucks. And that's for the very few people in the room who are familiar with Nabil al-Marab. And I did a video on this. If you look at my playlist, watch that video. It's really important to watch that video. Nabil al-Marab, the Boston connection of Al-Qaeda. Very, very, really interesting story. I was responsible for planning, financing, follow-up operations to destroy American military vessels at the Straits of Hormuz, the Straits of Gibraltar, and the Port of Singapore. I was responsible for planning, training, surveying to bomb and destroy the Panama Canal. I'm not going to waste your time. This is a ridiculous freaking list. The assassination of President Carter, bombing bridges in New York. I could go on and on. The amount of coordination he would have to need, and the operation behind it, would be bigger than Al Qaeda. Because remember what I told you, bin Laden even said that even hijacking 10 planes is too much. Wouldn't this be infinitely bigger than 10 hijackings of planes? This is unbelievable. So this is what they got out of torture. Now I leave it up to you, the 13 people in this room. Did he make it all up? Or was he behind some of them? Was he behind most of them? Was he behind all of them? Guess what? We'll never know, because the CIA thought it was a good idea to, instead of talking to these people like the FBI did, they rather torture the living crap out of them, because what I think, they did it on purpose. And that's the reason why they killed bin Laden, because if they brought him back, they don't want him going on the stand, because what if he said, I had nothing to do with 9/11, or the intelligence agencies were in touch with me, or I knew some high people in Saudi officials and Pakistan officials, or I was involved with 9/11 to an extent, and the intelligence apparatuses were also involved. Who knows what he was going to say? But instead of capturing him, like they did with Ramzi Youssef and Khalid Sheikh Muhammed and Ramzi bin al-Shib and Abu Zubaydah and Tawfiq bin Atash and Abdul Ahim al-Nashri and Fahad al-Kuso, they shoot and kill the most important terrorist operator in the world, and instead of bringing him to justice, they assassinate him. And that order came from the top. I think we know why. They don't want these guys talking because it might contradict what the 9/11 Commission report is saying, what the FBI Pent Bomb report is saying, and the narrative that continues from the State Department to this very day. As of right now, Khalid Sheikh Muhammad is housed in Guantanamo State Prison. The trial has not started. It is now 20 years. Now, I did an interview with Ken Williams, who wrote the Phoenix Memo. And the interview, he went to Guantanamo Bay. And he was there for Khalid Sheikh Muhammad's hearing. And I asked him a question about whether he believes the trial will start this year or in the future. And he told me this, and this would be quite horrifying if it does. He thinks that the State Department knows that they have no case because everything they admitted was under torture and that they're going to walk on every single charge. Instead, they're pausing the trial on purpose because in the future, they're going to make a deal with Khalid Sheikh Muhammad. And the deal is this: they're going to take away the death penalty for everybody involved if they admit to 9/11. Point blank. The horrifying thing of this is this: all the information and evidence, or lack thereof, by the prosecution will never know because it'll be locked up forever, for 40 years in the National Archives. And if they didn't have evidence of their guilt, they'll never admit it in public anyway because it's in a military tribunal. Maybe that's the freaking reason why it's at a military tribunal instead of the Southern District of New York, where the World Trade Center attacks took place. Coincidence? Sorry, pal. I can't go there. I think the CIA damn well know. They knew. They knew about the operation ahead of time. They allowed it to happen. They followed these guys, whether they had maybe an informant inside the group. That's something I'm working on right now. I think the Israelis did with Ziad Jarrah. That's a theory of mine. I might do a live video about that, tell you my theory I'm working on with DJ Thermal Detonator. I'm currently working on right now, behind the scenes, about the NSA. I'm actually talking with certain people about trying to get the transcripts of Alex Station, the transcripts of the NSA regarding Bin Laden's satellite phone and the Yemen hub in Yemen. That's 6 years worth right there. I want to see if I can make it public through a Freedom of Information request. But if that's being used as evidence in the trial, it's going to be classified. We can't do it. But if that happens and they make that deal with Khalid Sheikh Muhammad and they say, yes to it, we will never know. In recent times, anyway, we'll not know what the prosecution had and what they didn't have. And that's a scary thought when you think about it. And it really is an injustice to the victims' families, who must be, if this goes through, would be just reprehensible. On the other hand, if they continue with the trial, these guys are walking because their lawyers right now are salivating at the aspect of a trial taking place. And that's the reason why when Khalid Sheikh Muhammed and Tawfiq bin Attash and Ramzi bin al-Shib met with their lawyers, the CIA was monitoring their phone, their calls, their rooms. And this was broken by a reporter by the name of Carol Rosenberg at the New York Times. She wrote about this. Follow her on Twitter. Amazing. She is the best. She's updating. She's at Guantanamo updating every day about what's going on with the trial. The best to follow on Twitter. Carol Rosenberg. And the CIA was basically bugging, as well as the Department of Defense, allowing this. Bugging what they were saying, what they were talking about, even though it's protected under attorney-private privilege, client privilege. Why are they doing that? Because they want to know what they're talking about. Because I think they don't have a case. They don't got crap. Because they know that they can't use their admissions as evidence under torture. And that these guys are going to walk on 9/11 anyway. Think about that for a second. But I'll end it with Khalid Sheikh Muhammed. I mean, there is a number of treasure trove documents regarding the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and what Khalid Sheikh Muhammed went through there. And I could tell you right now, it's not for those who have a queasy stomach. The number, by the way, if you never saw The Mauritanian, it's about the story of Mohammed Al-Slahi, who is alleged to have been an Al Qaeda contact, who basically told the members of the Hamburg cell to go to Afghanistan instead of Chechnya. That never happened. So there's a big gap right there. Who told the Hamburg cell to go to Afghanistan? There's a big hole there. Anyway, the Mauritanian talks about the torture program, the SEER program I mentioned here. And it was like really unbelievable. When they captured Abu Zubaydah, I'll tell you one thing they did. When they captured Abu Zubaydah, they found out he was afraid of bugs. You know what they did? The first day, they put him in a coffin. They locked him in a coffin for 48 hours. And in the coffin were spiders, beetles, snakes, all these bugs in the coffin. What the hell is that supposed to prove? Mustafa al-Hasnawi, who's an alleged al-Qaeda financier, who allegedly wired money to Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shehi and Khalid al-Midar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. You know what they did to him? They raped him with a Brillo-laden stick that he now has to sit on a pillow for the rest of his life. I could tell you the number of things the CIA did in regard, because I read the Senate Select Committee reports, and if you never read it, read it. I'm actually uploading those files on my WordPress. You cannot believe what the CIA did. It's unbelievable. The person who prosecuted Mohammed al-Slahi, he quit the prosecution. He says when he read the report, I can't prosecute this guy because of what they did to him. And he was threatened by the Pentagon. He's threatened the Pentagon saying, where's your loyalty? Here's a piece of garbage who's involved with 9/11. I can't prosecute this guy because he read the torture reports. And that's why they destroyed the videos. They had videos of the tortures. They destroyed all of them. And that's written in the Senate Select Committee House Intelligence reports. All the videos are destroyed. Man. And guess what? In 1973, there was an old document by the CIA. And this is the real kicker, folks. An old document by the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. You know what they said in the document regarding torture? It doesn't work. Through the MK Ultra program, they found that torture, using a psychological form of torture, does not work because it makes the person say and do anything the interrogator wants. You tell me, people in this room, that the CIA knew about this, knew that CIA knew that torture doesn't work, but still employed torture on the very people in which they're trying to get information from, knowing that the information would be no good because they can't use it in a court of law. Now it makes you question why they tortured them in the first place. But I don't have an answer for that. Read some of the comments in the room. If you have questions, I'll try to answer. I tried to answer some of them during the discussion here today, and it's I feel like I don't want to go on a tangent and throw you off guard, and then but I was given some advice about entertaining the chat, and I think that's good advice, by the way. Yeah. But yeah, I mean that will basically do it, and they're still waiting for the trial. And according to Carol Rosenberg, the trial is now delayed to 2023. And I also think that they're waiting for these guys to die. We'll just wait and wait and wait, and they'll die, and we won't have a trial. We won't have anything, and then we can lock up the whatever information we have or lack thereof, and we just won't tell the public what we didn't have, and we'll lock away what we have for 30, 40 years. Isn't that what they did with JFK? 65 years? 68 years? 68 years? Was he assassinated 63? 58 years. 58 years. And we're still getting documents. And there's still so much locked away. And that's the reason why they do it. It's so that by then, 40 years from now, everybody who is involved in some way or another regarding 9/11 is dead. And you can't prosecute a dead person. Unless we can get enough of you guys and enough of other people to start spreading the message. And that's why I sound like a broken record again, and I hate to do it, but I'd love to see you guys open up your own channels, write your own stuff, do your own videos, because you can. You can. You see what's out there for 9/11, how much garbage there is, and it's so much of it. So we need you, the people. We need you guys to talk about these issues because nobody else is talking about them. That's the reason why I do these live discussions. And hopefully they're educational and informative for you, because I'm hoping that you'll become the leaders that we need and not just followers. But yeah, I think what I'll do is I'll end it there. And, I'll do another live discussion. I might do another live discussion soon, talking about the Hamburg cell. Maybe, or maybe another subject. But yeah, I think that's what I'll do in the future. And listen, thank you all for coming tonight and listening to me. And have a good evening.